Now look, today's brought to you by Climate Action. Climate Action's been around since 2007. Through virtual events and digital events, it's bringing together people, policymakers, business leaders and civil society to accelerate work on the Sustainable Development Goals and further the Paris Climate Agreement. Doing a brilliant job. And Climate Action is working in partnership, technical partnership with the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization to bring you this great food challenge. Thank you to both of them for hosting us today. Now, everything that we're discussing today is part of a much wider roadmap that's running through to COP26, being hosted in Glasgow in the UK in November next year, about 11 months from now. And there's a number of events that you can take part in with Climate Action over the 10 months to come. Things like transition summits, flagship events as well, where we're really exploring how to make COP26 a success. It has to be. We cannot afford to fail. Now, I'd really like to thank our partners over the Great Food Challenge. Without them, we could not host this kind of event. We could not draw you into the conversation. We couldn't explore the solutions that we need. Thank you all. I know you're putting the Sustainable Development Goals at the very heart of what you do. Now, let me share with you some quick thoughts on housekeeping. I really want you to know that we're going to record this event, which is great because you can watch it then subsequently on this platform through pre-records. You can also go back and look at what we discussed in sessions 1 and 2. Fantastic event, so much great insight to share. So make sure you use the platform as well. Remember, there's an expo as well. There's a way of interacting with the partners, asking them questions and understanding what they do as well. Network with each other. We're not the only ones here with solutions and ideas. Talk with each other, bring those ideas to the table as well. Complete the survey. Make sure you're feeding back to us, sharing your ideas about how we can make these events even better in the future. That's appreciated. And finally, subscribe to the Climate Action platform. It's there to allow you to be part of this journey through to COP26, building the solution that we need. Now, today we've got great speakers, great panels, and they're going to have loads of ideas about the solutions that we need. But they're not the only ones with answers. You've got them as well. So if you've got questions for the panel, you want to get involved, there's 2 ways of doing it. You can use this platform, the Q&A function, or you can use Twitter. Use climate_action_, Climate Action Live, the hashtag, to pose your questions, and we'll try and get them answered for you as well. So do please ask those questions. So let me just summarise the agenda that lies ahead over the next couple of hours. In a moment, I'm going to be joined by a wonderful panel. I'm going to be joined by Mohammed, John and Erda, who are going to be exploring with me how do we bring investment into the system. We'll have a brief break. Then I'll be joined by Willie to give us a real deep dive on regenerative agriculture, the kind of practices we need to really transform the food and agriculture system in the future. Then Zatuni will be back to bring a panel together to explore further that investment challenge. And then Zatuni will be summing up on behalf of the FEO about everything he's seen from the 3 parts of this series as well. So that's the agenda. That's what we're doing. So I'd like to press on without any further ado and move to the first session that we're going to have today. Now, I'd appreciate Mohammed Mansouri, Director of the FEO Investment Centre, John MacLeod, independent agricultural expert, and a real knowledge on how to involve smallholders in this debate that we're having. And Erda Sikari, who's from the Principal Agribusiness Advisor at the EBRD. I'd love them to join me on stage to have the discussion. Thank you all for joining me. It really is appreciated. I know we're going to have a rich discussion about this investment homework question and aligning the world's food system with the Sustainable Development Goals. And if I could perhaps turn to you, Mohammed, first, and just ask you to make some brief opening remarks, 3 or 4 minutes, before I move on to the other speakers as well. Mohammed, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike, and I'm very happy to be with Iride and John on this panel and to have these introductory remarks. The global COVID-19 pandemic actually is putting at risk all the progress we've made on SDG 1 and 2, especially as far as my organization is concerned. And poverty and food insecurity are increasing dramatically. So the situation is more particularly serious for poor and rural and vulnerable households that do not or have limited options when it comes to risk management, to insurance, to credits, or to alternative livelihoods as well. And to add to this, the climate crisis, and I think climate action is all about it, is compounding these impacts. And as the UN Secretary just put it yesterday, there is no vaccine for the planet. Therefore, every country, city, financial institutions, and company should adopt plans for a transition to net zero emissions by 2050. While the situation is now particularly challenging, it is not entirely new, actually, because COVID-19 is just exposing the existing fragilities of the global and local food systems, where only the strongest can weather the shock. So to look at it, from a systemic approach, from the food systems angle, the global agri-food system is simultaneously a victim of climate change. The chance of simultaneous production shocks can be staggering. As a culprit, as a big emitter or polluter, and most importantly for us in FAO, it's a big part of the solution. And that solution is the transformation of our food systems. Increasing efficiencies along the food system must go hand in hand with reducing inequalities as well. And the FAO will also work to achieve SDG 10, which is about reducing inequalities, creating jobs, decent jobs, and livelihoods for women and youth particularly. Sustainable growth requires an improved policy environment and critical public investments to accelerate the adoption of technologies such as green technologies, innovations, and practices alongside basic infrastructure. And this is exactly what we do in the Investment Center, working with financial institutions at the international level, such as EBRD, and I'm very happy to be with Iride on this panel. So we do work on how to increase or how to make more and better public investments and private investment. And this starts with the national budgets and how they can be more effective, how to get good strategies at country level, with ODA, whether it is the financial institutions, climate financing, but also to look into how public finance can leverage more private finance and what are the instruments to do that. One of them, of course, is the enabling policies, the policy dialogue between public and private actors. But there are also, a set of options or innovations, and options such as blended finance. And I may come to that a bit later, as this is also a way to blend knowledge and capacities with finance to achieve scale and to achieve the SDGs. Over. Thank you again.
Mohammed, outstanding. To hear the challenge of COVID, the accelerator of an already failed food system making things worse. There is no vaccine for the planet. The food system is the victim and the culprit in many of these challenges, but is also the solution, and how people need to be put at the heart of building a new system. Outstanding start. Thank you very much. John, I'd love to invite you to the floor and just build upon those remarks, please.
Yes, thank you, Mike. So I want to zoom down and talk to the context of the people growing the food, the smallholder farmer. And as you know, African agriculture is dominated by small farmers. And it's really important that we look at how we can bring them to intensifying their levels of production in a sustainable way. So sustainable intensification of smallholder production systems, and exploring innovative ways of how we can accelerate that and create a more enabling environment for them. There is huge potential, massive potential. I see it every day as I move around. I'm very fortunate. I'm always on the road, seldom in one country for more than a month, and it's just highlighted to me the opportunity there is and the potential. But nothing has changed for decades, and we seem to be stuck. That said, I am seeing and have seen some really interesting and exciting examples, which gave me hope. At one point, I was stuck, and I thought I'm fighting a losing battle. But working with some partners and the innovative approaches to addressing these problems, like AgDevco, has really inspired me to see that there are models and there are ways that we can address this. So yeah, zooming down, I want to talk. The key problem we have is, it's not a popular topic, but it's rapid population growth and the persistence of poverty in Africa. And what this is doing is it's placing unprecedented pressure on our soils. The examples of declining soil fertility in smallholder systems are numerous. The degradation is decreasing the long-term ability of our soils ability to produce food, and it'll be very difficult to reverse. In the context of finance, what does this mean? Well, it means a decline in soil fertility will reduce the marginal rate of return of these farming systems and increase their vulnerability to climate shocks. The parallels can be drawn between the level of carbon in the soil's water holding capacity, and thus its ability to compensate for variabilities in rainfall and reduce production risks for these small farmers. The more the soil can compensate, the lower the risk is to the farmer who invests in these inputs and the finance institutions that may be providing credit and support for these inputs and services. So the challenge we now face is there's more people and we need more food. But the more people, the less land to go around. So more food needs to be produced off less land. And so hence the need to look towards sustainable intensification. We really are at a tipping point in the agro-ecosystem. In the past, the low intensity of land use meant that slash-burn agriculture using traditional tillage systems with zero minimal soil inputs were sustainable. I've seen in the past that it did work. When people had long fallow periods of 3 to 9 years, the soils could regenerate. But now, with the pressure on the land, there's ever smaller land parcels. Many farmers have less than an acre to produce cash crops, and to really intensify the production. But they continue to practice, in many instances, old extensive farming methods. And there's no longer a fallow period and no inputs. The result is this rapid decline in soil fertility and biodiversity, and the consequent decline in the resilience of these farming systems to resist climate shocks. I know I'm waffling on a bit, but the correlation between soil fertility and farmers' income is self-evident. So with decline in fertility, we can expect, and we are seeing, decline in yields and increase in poverty. Increased poverty really has a big impact on our efforts against climate change because it puts more pressure on the natural resources, especially in the rural areas and the more remote areas. And you see an ever-increasing level of exploitation of these natural resources. And yeah, in many cases, these contribute directly or indirectly to more greenhouse gas emissions. And I'll just give you 2 quick examples that I came across in the field recently of farmers cutting down forest to produce charcoal. But the reason it's done was to subsidize their low household incomes because of reduced yields as a result of reduced soil fertility and poor practices, lack of access to inputs to sustain their soils, or the knowledge of how to do so. So another one I came across recently, very sadly, and I think it really highlighted the challenge we face. It's so easy to preach from a distance and say what we should and shouldn't do. But I came across a farmer who had cut down a tree that was 140 foot high and had a base of 10 foot recently in Ghana. And it had just happened. And I asked him, why did you do this? He said, well, I needed school fees. I'm not making enough. And I would say, I'll draw a correlation here to COVID. The decrease in market prices have put really a lot of strain on these smallholder farmers, and they're not meeting their needs. And so they're looking to find it elsewhere. And that means seeing what they can get off their land. And if you've got massive trees like this, they're worth something. The sad thing, this tree was cut down and sold for $50. A tree that was 140 foot high, and I stood next to it, put my hands up, and I was still shorter than the diameter of the trunk. It was a giant. So that just hit home. If we're not supporting these farmers and enabling them, to live and produce sustainably off the land, it's going to push back on our efforts to reduce greenhouse gases and global warming. So quickly, sorry, the solution is to change the way we look at these farmers. We need to look at how we can support them and how we can help them to intensify their production in a sustainable way. So we really need to look at innovating financing and technical assistance packages that cater to their specific needs.
John, thank you. And as a parent, how can I argue with somebody who's sold a tree for $50 to try and bring education to their kids? It's not their fault. The system is failing them.
No.
And John, I've heard you speak passionately in the past about land rights, about extension support, and also farmers getting a fair price for the hard work they do from those up the value chain from them. They're all things I want to come back and have a discussion with you about, but that's brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Erda, from the EBRD, if I can pass the floor to you for your opening comments, please.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here in this panel with Mohammed and John. I think what I want to say is that this agenda is huge. I mean, it's very ambitious, it's very comprehensive, it's universal. And I think that it's our responsibility to connect and to connect the dots. So what John was describing, the smallholder or the big policy level that Mohammed was talking about, I think we need to look at all these angles, and we need to cooperate together, private sector, governments, farmers, companies, to actually bring about this really, really big agenda. It is true that the COVID-19 crisis put us a bit backwards towards the achievement of this goal, but we need to push to keep and preserve the gains that we achieved so far, and also to speed up the trajectory to the achievement of these goals. The European Bank for Reconstruction and Development in the agribusiness sector works with private sector companies along the whole food chain. So here again, it is important that we look at the farming, processing, trading, food distribution, packaging, retail, all these aspects to support transition towards competitive, dynamic agribusiness industries, and also to reflect, on the links with the SDGs and how we can really create a food system that is green, that is inclusive, and where there are opportunities for everyone. I think what Mohammed mentioned before, it is important that investments are aligned with these main goals and that we all work towards that. But we need to remember that for the first time, maybe since the Addis Ababa 2015, the role of the private sector has really been recognized. So how to create the right incentive and to support those actors that are trying to do the right things and invest towards more inclusive and more green food systems, I think is where IFIs can have really their main, outcomes and their main impact on the ground. The agribusiness sector strategy of the BRD recognizes that and really asks and really strives to create a balance and to look at the balance between many competing needs, which John was already saying in his remarks. We need to try to efficiently close the food gap and provide people with the food they need and the nutrition they need. So we really need to focus on food security and how to achieve it in a very efficient way. At the same time, there is a need to preserve natural resources. In John's, of course, example, it was the tree. But at the same time, we need to improve the social and environmental impact of the sector and create job and opportunities for everyone, from the small farmers to women, to youth that is in the sector, and to upskill those people that really work in the sector in remote areas and not in urban areas where there is a huge effect on poverty and where all this is interlinked. So I believe that a panel like this one can create opportunities for people from all over the world to just connect and brainstorm and just look at different perspectives. But then there should be really, the everyday job of every one of us that really need to strive to achieve impact on the ground at the level in which we work. and also to improve, the life of many people and that are in countries that are less developed and that will suffer more from COVID.
Oda, thank you so much. And I'm going to come back in a moment and ask you for some practical examples of the work that EBRD are doing. I know it's transformational, but the more you can share with our audience, the things that you're seeing on the ground, the better. Thank you. Now, over the next 20 minutes, we're going to have a rich discussion, picking up on the themes that the panellists have shared with us there. At the end, for all three of them, I'm going to come back and ask them, what are the three practical things they would like to see happen in the next 12 to 18 months to drive the transformation forward? But that's at the end of our discussion. Mohammed, I want to come back to you. You mentioned this important word, blended finance. Can you just talk us through what that means in practice and how you, as the centre, are moving that forward?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mike. And the definition of blended finance is very simple. It's the blending between, let's say, public resources, public money, or philanthropic resources and private resources, okay? And that's, you use the public and philanthropic resources as leverage to mobilize much needed additional capital and to invest it in the food and ag sector or in other sectors. And this is, it's a very simple model, and it can, reach smaller, undeserved farmers like John was saying and so on. So it's the recognition that by doing that, there is an element of public good in that, okay? And the public good is called the SDGs. So in a way, you invest in order to mobilize more resources. So it's by no means a silver bullet, but it can definitely help, lessen the pandemic's negative, in the short run impacts and accelerate the agri-food sector's recovery by building back better and so on, because we need to sustain an effort in order to keep the system working. So in the short run, it can provide additional liquidity for those existing clients, still able to keep their heads above the water, and they are needing, working capital. In the longer run, blended finance can really support, sustainable development and recovery from the COVID-19, for example, and build that resilience, especially when it is coupled with technical assistance. So in a way, blending is not only public and private money, it is also blending money with knowledge, with capacity, with human capital development, and that is the secret behind. So by blending, you can really look at the sustainability of the investments, or the responsible investment, private investments, but you really look at what are the elements that can accelerate that. And that public good elements can be covered, by either matching grants or guarantees and so on. So there are many different products for that. But I think, for me, really the secret behind is that you can bring a lot in terms of knowledge. You can build capacities to cater for sustainability. You can bring a lot of innovation, and that is what blended finance is about. Over.
Mohammed, thank you. We've had a couple of great questions from one of our lit watchers, Phil Malone, which I'm going to come back to in a minute with you, Mohammed. But I'd just like Urda to go across to you about this issue of blended finance. Can you give us a couple of practical examples where the EBRD is bringing public and private money together to help deliver the Sustainable Development Goals?
Okay, so we do work on blended financing product together with other donors that actually are like-minded partners for us and help us achieve, the impact I was describing on the ground before. I can give you an example. The EBRD works with many traders across the region, and we try to connect traders in export countries for grain. I mean, grain is one of the commodities that is key to food security. So to connect connect those with import countries where, the price of grain is very sensitive for the poor people on the ground, for example. And in this context, we not only support the companies that want to do the export of these grains, but also we support through technical assistance and capacity building the farmers to be integrated in these value chains, so that they can produce and sell the grain that then would be traded in the region. And just to put things into perspective, the region accounts for almost approximately, let's say, 20% of global trade of grain. So by incorporating and including those smaller farmers into those value chains, by do technical assistance, capacity building to these farmers for different practices, different growing partners to increase the efficiency and the yields of their own produce, allow us to achieve a bigger impact than just looking at one company per se. Some of this work for these companies and for these farmers we do also together with the FAO, whereby we use the FAO knowledge and skill and networks to actually reach out to the smaller farmers that by ourselves maybe we cannot reach. So this is another example on how we can blend financing with some donors that want to see those impacts, but also cooperate between IFIs and UN agencies such as the FAO to reach really an impact that is along the whole food chain. So this could be one example. Another example can be policy dialogue and the regulatory environment, building the right, setting for these impacts to be achieved in some of these countries. And again, together with the FAO, we try to build the resilience into the food system to make sure that our engagement is not only a one-off, but actually that there is a sustainability on policies and predictability of this policy where government and private sector can align and really, work together to achieve these goals.
Oda, thank you. Now, John, I've not forgotten you. There's so much I want to discuss with you in 1 second, but I've got one question for Mohammed from Phil Malone, co-founder of Access Agriculture. And Phil's saying, the FAO have launched a decade of family farming. How is this being supported by the FAO Investment Centre? Are you involved with that?
Yes, actually, this is why I feel very, very happy listening to John and the experiences with the smallholder farmers. One thing that we need to recognize is that the biggest investors in agriculture, food and agriculture system, are the farmers, and especially the smallholder farmers. And I think it is something that is, very high on our agenda, which is how we can help small-scale farmers unleash their potential. And John was citing, a lot of those elements which have to do with bringing in technology, the capacities. One huge element that I think has been orphaned in what we do is the human capital of farmers, okay? Which is really the education of farmers in terms of business and in technical terms. You are growing or you are rearing, you're dealing with dairy, you need really to have the education to deal with your business, okay? And you need, on the top of that, to have the capacities to manage your farm and to be a real entrepreneur. So in a way, supporting the capacities of farmers, there are many different models. One very popular model in FAO is the farmer field schools, for example, that is also used by many of the financial institutions we work with, the World Bank, IFAD, and African Development Bank, and others. And that is really very powerful in terms of supporting small-scale or family farming. Family farming is broader than small-scale farming, but small-scale farming tends to be exclusively family farming. So, in a way, for us, these are the people who produce the food. Okay, they produce the majority of the food in many countries, and there are two elements to consider. One is that women are the majority of family farmers, okay, and of small-scale farmers. So we should always say the farmer and her family, okay. If we go with the democratic, majority. And the other element is that in many countries, the population of farmers is aging. And, and we need to work to bring to the front the new generation. But this means also that we have to make farmer businesses attractive to the youth. Okay, so here comes more technology, comes decent work, comes digital work, that they have really to engage into. And I think, this is a lot about what the FAO Investment Center does in terms of modernizing, working on sustainable mechanization, working on really the farming as a business to sustain the family and their future, and especially on the women and youth dimensions and the inclusiveness.
Mohammed, thank you. Now, John, you've been tremendously patient, and I know you've got a lot to share with us, but there's two specific questions that have come in that I'd really appreciate you trying us to sort of answer. One's from Greg Metchka. He's the VP of Global Purchasing at Griffiths Foods. And his view is that the problem is of demand. As long as there is demand for low-cost, cheap food in the marketplace, the pressure is just passed back down to smallholder farmers ultimately. How do we ensure that the marketplaces respects and values sustainable food right back to the smallholder? That's question one. Question two comes from Conan Jules. And Conan's asked, how do you expect to create opportunities for family farming and alleviate poverty when the money goes to governments? Could you design a financial mechanism to leverage cash that will go directly to farmers or through local banks? So if you could just weave a response to those two questions into your wider response, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
I think, Mark, you touch on a key issue. You're very right. We often work in a scenario where it isn't open and it's a free market, and that the pressure to push down farmers on price and produce at the bare minimum is there, and it goes further than that. And I'm going to highlight a problem because it's something we need to address. I'm very aware of some larger food processors and off-takers in the brewery industry who specifically calculate the cost of production of farmers so that they can understand the bare minimum price that they can offer them but still sustain them in production. And they do the same to the aggregators, and they squeeze them down to a margin of 5%. So they just barely manage to carry on. And we really need to change the behavior of these large multinationals and the way they look at the bottom line as the primary driver of all business. I think there's a change in mindset. If we're just going to be answering to a board and shareholders and it's all about the bottom line, and we don't look at the social capital and environmental capital, then it won't change. But it needs to, because if we want to fight climate change and we're going to squeeze farmers, we're going to lose. These farmers are forced then, because of the low margins and the small amounts of money they paid, they're forced to exploit the natural resources. They're forced to mine soils in the long term for a short-term gain because they can't afford inputs, but they still need the output. So I think perhaps the answer lies in a wider shift in policy and how do we value social capital, how do we value environmental capital and common good. And Mohammed, you talked about using public funds for public good. How can we come in and value the environmental capital that we have out there as a public good, and how do we make the large multinational off-takers value that and take that into account when they're setting up their buying schemes from large growers. On the other hand, on the more niche value chain, we see that it's less of a problem. And we see that the medium to high end consumer cares where their food comes from. They're aware of where it comes from. They want to know what they're eating. They want to know that it's good for them. So they will buy organic coffee. They will buy organic cocoa. They will buy fair trade product. And an example is in Tanzania, there's cooperatives which market their coffee directly to an off-taker in Japan. And there's a direct market link, and it's a premium market, and they're receiving a price premium, and they're fully aware of the prices within the supply chain. So I think that's also key, is transparency. That the smallholder farmer is aware of the price build up through that value chain, and when they see that, they're less ignorant and they're more aware of what they deserve, and then they're being paid a fair price. And then you start to see an investment in the soil, and you see looking at regenerative agricultural practices, scaling back on agrochemicals, producing healthy food, because now we've given them the opportunity. We've said to them, we value you growing this properly, and we're going to pay you for it. And as you said, it begins with consumer awareness. It's a pull. It's got a pull. We can't push them to do that. There's got to be a market signal. And I think if we look at what policies can we change to encourage those market signals to feed through down the value chain, to trigger that response from smallholder farmers and from aggregators. So, okay, we're going to do it differently now because this is what the market wants, and they're going to pay us a fair deal for it. So I hope that answers the question. To jump onto Conan's question, can you just repeat it for me, please?
Yeah, so I think Conan's concern was that funding, very valuable funding from people at the EBRD, from the FAO, from governments, is going to other national governments from where it might not reach the smallholder. Are there mechanisms by which money can go directly to the smallholder, or at least very close to them through local banks?
I think the challenge with local banks, and what I've seen, is there are several mechanisms where big institutions, and I'm going to say, for example, IFAD will put in funding to a local financed institution to make these loans to small micro businesses or to agri-businesses. But it's not the farmer. It's going to a medium-sized business that's maybe, got a market cap of $2-3 million, and that's seen as small. So the small farmer never accesses that. It's very difficult for them to access that directly. But there are interesting ways of being able to do it if you use the right partners. And I'll draw an example. I work with one group called the Smallholder Development Unit in AgDevCo, and what a novel approach that was taken there was they set up an interest-free revolving fund as a grant. So it's public money for a public good, but it's providing finance to farmers, directly to farmers for inputs. But as Mohammed alluded to, it's really important that this goes with technical capacity building and a TA facility, building the knowledge and capacity.
John, I think we might just have lost you. Sorry, John, I think we just lost you. I'm just going to pass. Sorry, John, if I could just very quickly pass to Mohammed, because the clock is ticking down ever so slightly for me. Mohammed, if you could just give us a very brief perspective on this flow of money to smallholders, I would appreciate it. And I'm going to come to each of the panelists just to wrap things up with 1, 2 or 3 key bullet points that you'd like to see happen in the short term. So Mohammed, over to you, please.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. I think about the flow, you need to think about a system with pipes. Okay, so you need to build the pipes, and you need as well to get the liquid flowing into those pipes. Okay, so the money can be that liquid, but you need to build the pipes, and that is the capacity. Okay, and that is really the human and social capital of the farmers. That getting farmer organizations that are stronger, can lead to better negotiation power for them, in terms of prices, in terms also of dealing with their own government, local governments, and so on. So in a way, smallholder farmers are already, any farmer actually, even the big ones, are always price takers, okay, in the system. Okay, so they don't choose the price, they cannot impose the price. They are usually price takers in the system because they are dealing with big corporations and so on. So how do you get the right level of aggregation in order to have a price that is remunerative for them? But John, I think he raised a very good issue, which is that there is a political economy element there, that the prices in the urban areas are really set for the poor to buy food. So the least price possible in the urban areas. And that is not always, leading to remunerative prices in the rural areas for people, to have a decent livelihood. So in a way, you need to get a good understanding of those public goods. What is the price of being the custodian for the environment, of maintaining it, and so on, and get a support system that can enable the farmers to have a decent life and decent job, and the urban people as well, whether poor or not, to have affordable food on the table.
Clock is nearly ticked on us. That's been a brilliant conversation. And I'm going to ask you both, all three of you, for a very brief 1 or 2 points that you'd like to see happen in the next 12 to 18 months. Erda, I'm going to start with you, then I'm going to come to John. Mohammed, I'll give you the final word. Erda.
Okay, maybe on my side, what I would like to say is we need collective action. We need everyone working towards the COP together. Institutions working according to their own mandate and what they can do better, but just to focus on a single goal to build back better. Bank like DPRD continue providing investments in the private agribusiness sector with stable long-term finance to help companies, build resiliency against shocks and hopefully, recover faster.
Erda, thank you. John, your advice.
I'm going to jump in and say, sort of Conan, you preceded what I was going to end off with. And I think it's really important to get the resources that we're mobilizing directly to the farmer where they need it. And it's being able to provide that finance directly to the farmer at something that's realistic, that they can afford. And then building the technical capacity of these farmers to be able to apply it, and then creating a support system around the farmer for all the ancillary services that he requires to be successful. The aggregation, the marketing, the supply of quality inputs, agronomy advice, all these support networks. He can't do it alone. If you look at the environments where farming has flourished, the farmer is supported, and he's made a priority. And I think looking at how we can change policies, how we can finance slightly differently, novel ways. I liked what Mohammed said, is blending private capital with public funds because it's a public good, having that viewpoint on it and valuing our farmers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
John, thank you very much. Mohammed, the final brief word to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. And actually, I would have said what John just said, which is valuing farmers and building their human capital. But I would say something also a bit different. But I think we need a very strong political leadership. It's the political leadership that blends all of us. That sets the direction in the long run, get the programs to be fixed in the short run, and that is because the agri-food system is too important and too big to fail. So we don't have any choice actually but to work together, and we can lead each one from where we are. We are a technical agency, FAO. We need to do well our job, work with EBRD, with the EU, with others, with climate action. just to move the agenda forward. Thank you.
Mohammed, thank you. So look, Mohammed, John, Erdo, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. We could have gone another hour. I would have gladly have had this discussion. You've been brilliant. I mean, I take from this, we need to involve the marketplace. Until the marketplace reforms, and we can't get change in the smallholders world. Second is this concept of digital skills, entrepreneurial skills for farmers. And thirdly is how do we value nature? How do we pay farmers for protecting the nature that we all depend upon as well? So thank you very much. Really appreciate all your input. We're going to take a brief break in a moment. In 10 minutes, we'll come back. We'll have another sort of deep dive from Willie when we talk about regenerative farming. We're also then going to have Zatuni Tech at the final panel of the day as well. Again, build upon all the rich discussion we've had so far. Please, during a 10-minute break, get involved with the expo, get on that platform, exchange views, and any other questions, please keep them coming in and we'll try and answer them. Please join us in 10 minutes at the top of the hour. Thank you very much.